kerosene candles, kerosene lamps, so we would have some light. And we would freeze. It was so cold. We would freeze. My father in the wintertime would break twigs, and we would make a fire inside the shelter. And we would fall asleep. And most mornings we would wake up with carbon monoxide poisoning. And whoever woke up first would drag the other two outside and slap them so we could wake up. And that's the type of life I lived. I lived in the bomb shelter from age 10 to age 17, robbed from my youth.
Well, what sort of tactics did the Palestinians use during the war?
When the Palestinians started fighting in Lebanon, the war took on such savagery that it was inconceivable for us to think of. They started massacring the Christian cities, city after city. One of the major massacres was the city of Damour. They would walk into a bomb shelter, and they would see a mother and a father hiding in the bomb shelter with a little baby. They would tie one leg of the baby to the mother, another leg to the father, and pull the parents apart, splitting the child in half. They would walk into the churches, and they would urinate and defecate on the altar using the Bible pages as toilet paper. The last friend that I had before I left Lebanon, who worked for me, she was mentally disturbed because they made her slaughter her own son on her lap. They tied her to a chair, tied a knife to her hand, held her hand, and made her cut her own son's throat. They would kill the Christian men, and one of the Palestinian signature killing way was to cut the genitals of the male and stick it in his mouth and cut a cross with a knife on his chest. That's how they used to kill the Christian men and leave them laying in the grounds in the moor. In my town, in the beginning of the war, when they were starting to take control a little bit, we would be hiding in the bomb shelter. And in the beginning of the war, the renters that rented from us, we all hid together in this small room, an 8 by 10 room. That's where 4 families lived. They had 9 children. We were 9 children in the bomb shelter. I was the oldest child. And the Palestinians would park their cannon in front of our bomb shelter and shoot at Israel, fully knowing that Israel is going to retaliate and we're going to die, because the way they would do it is they would shell Israel, then drive their tank away. So when Israel would shell back, we would, be dead, and we would make great evening news, great ratings. And that was a tactic that the Palestinians used over and over. They would hide between civilians. They would shoot their tanks and their cannons in between the civilians' home. And they always chose the Christians' homes only, not the Muslims' homes, because they wanted us to die, not the Muslims. And that's how the war continued. It was unbelievable for us as Christians to even fathom the barbarism and the monstrosities that they have committed, because we have no point of reference to such savagery.
Well, what was life like for you and your family in that bomb shelter?
Well, our back was to Israel, and the Palestinians were surrounding us to kill us. So we either were going to be killed and slaughtered by the Palestinians, or we go to Israel and beg for help. And we knew of the two evils, because remember, we were raised in Lebanon thinking that Israel is the devil, the Jews are evil, but we knew of the two evils. The Jews are not going to slaughter us, because after all, we had more shared values with them than we had with the Muslims and the Palestinians. So a few people from my town went to Israel and begged for help. And that's how we stayed alive. Israel would come in the middle of the night and would bring supplies to the Christians. They would bring food, milk for the children. They would bring ammunition to the military. They would take the Christian men and train them inside Israel, because the Christians were educated, but they didn't know how to street fight. We were not like the Palestinians. And you can have all the degrees on the wall, law degree, a doctorate. That does not defend your life from someone who is bent on killing you in the name of God. Israel was the only country that understood what the Christians were going through. And Israel stood by us and kept us alive. And that's how we stayed alive for 7 years. In 1982, Israel entered Lebanon. And notice how I say entered Lebanon, not invaded Lebanon. The Christians were praying for Israel to come into Lebanon and liberate them from the Palestinians. And the only reason Israel came into Lebanon was because Hezbollah was working with the Palestinians, also with the Syrians, and we had a lot of other Muslims from a lot of Arabic countries that came to Lebanon to fight Israel. And they started shelling Israel. And all the northern towns in Israel were being shelled to the point where their citizens were living in bomb shelters just like us. And this went on for months. It wasn't a matter of a month or two. This went on for months. And Israel decided it's going to go into Lebanon and at least clear the Palestinians and push them far enough so that their artillery would not reach the northern towns of Israel. While Israel entered Lebanon, the Muslims and the Palestinians were shelling us frantically. One of their bombs exploded in front of my bomb shelter as my mother was running to the shelter, and she became wounded. When she became wounded, we had nowhere to take her in Lebanon. Our only lifeline was Israel. That's where all the sick went to get treated. That's where all the wounded went to get treated. Medical treatment free of charge to anyone that needed it for 7 years when Israel took care of us. We took my mother to get first aid at the Lebanese hospital in my town, which was a shell of a hospital. There was one Israeli doctor and 2 Israeli nurses on duty. They gave her first aid, and we put her in an Israeli-donated ambulance and drove her to the border. It was a 10-minute drive. The Lebanese driver, when we got to the border, walks over and asks me for money for the fee for the ambulance. And like an innocent teenager, I pull all the money that my daddy had given me out of my pocket, and I show it to him, and I say, "How much do I owe you?" And he looks at my money, and he says, "Give me 30, which was half the money I had. I gave it to him, and I thanked him from the bottom of my heart. He said that was the fee for the ambulance. They transferred my mother into another Israeli ambulance inside Israel, and that ambulance drove us to Sivat Hospital, which was an hour drive. The driver was an Israeli soldier. He was so nice to me. He treated me like his own daughter. He put me at such ease because I was afraid. I was afraid of the unknown. I was uncomfortable. I felt awkward. After all, I'm a Lebanese. I didn't have anyone in Israel. My mother was half unconscious in the back stretcher of the ambulance. And I was stunned at how nice that Israeli driver was. We get to the hospital. They took my mother out into the emergency room. I walked around to the Israeli driver to pay him my money, the fee for the ambulance. He looked at it and he said, "What is this?" And I said, "Don't you need the fee for the ambulance?" And he says, "No." He said, "This is a free service from us to you. Keep your money, and I wish you well. I hope your mothers recover." And I thought to myself, what an honest man. What an ethical man. This man could have taken my money and partied all night, and I would not have known the difference. Yet he didn't. And all of a sudden, I felt very angry because I realized that the Lebanese driver who drove me the 10-minute drive to the border basically robbed me. That was my first lesson in the character and values of the Arabic people and the Israeli people. We went into the emergency room, and there were hundreds of people wounded in the emergency room. There were Lebanese brought in from Lebanon. There were Christians brought in from Lebanon. Muslims brought in. Palestinians wounded brought in from Lebanon.